Most people remember Terry Jacks for one song.
They can still hum the melody decades later, the words ingrained so deeply in their memory that they never seem to fade. But fewer know the real story behind the man who created that masterpiece, and even fewer understand the devastating price he paid for immortality.
What most don't realize is that Terry Jacks didn't just write one unforgettable song.
He created an entire legacy built on sacrifice, perfectionism, and an unwavering commitment to artistry that would ultimately cost him everything that mattered. His journey from a young dreamer in Winnipeg to an international music icon wasn't just a tale of triumph. It was a story about how the pursuit of perfection can destroy the very relationships that make success meaningful. Terry grew up as the oldest of 5 boys in Winnipeg, Manitoba, in a family that seemed destined for the professional world. His father owned a successful architecture firm, and the expectation was clear: Terry would follow the same path. He even studied architecture at university, walking a predetermined road that countless sons before him had walked. But deep inside, there was a fire that refused to be extinguished. Music called to him in a way that blueprints and buildings never could. When his family relocated to Vancouver in the early 1960s, Terry made a decision that would define his entire life. He picked up a guitar and abandoned the safety of his father's profession. By 18, he had already partnered with guitarist Guy Soul to form a band called the Chessman. Within 2 years, they had claimed 4 top 10 hits in Vancouver's thriving music scene. They were local heroes, the kind of band that made teenagers desperate to attend their performances. The momentum was undeniable, the energy infectious. But success at the local level was never enough for Terry. He appeared regularly on CBC Television's Music Hop, a national platform that would change everything. It was there, on that small television stage, that Terry met a young singer named Susan Pescovitz. She would become not only his musical partner but also the love of his life, though their relationship would eventually become a cautionary tale about ambition and love colliding head-on. Susan's story had begun years earlier in Saskatoon, where she grew up singing before she could talk. By age 7, she was already performing on local radio stations. Her voice possessed a rare quality, pure, emotional, and capable of expressing depths that most singers spend lifetimes trying to achieve. By 15, she was a regular on the same CBC show where she would eventually meet Terry. When they finally connected in 1966, it was supposed to be temporary. Susan needed a rhythm guitarist for a single performance in Hope, British Columbia.
Every other guitarist she knew was unavailable. Someone suggested calling Terry Jacks. What started as a one-time collaboration would transform into something far more significant.
They began playing together whenever they could, in small coffee houses throughout Vancouver. By 1967, they had invited Craig McCow to join on lead guitar.
That same year, they found their name, the Poppy Family.
Terry and Susan married shortly after, and their creative partnership deepened into something both beautiful and dangerous. The stage was set for greatness, but nobody could have predicted the emotional toll this partnership would exact. By 1968, the Poppy Family had evolved into something truly unique. Craig McCow had discovered a fascination with East Indian music and brought Satwan Singh, an accomplished tabla player, into the group. The combination was revolutionary for its time. Susan's emotionally raw vocals blended with Craig's distinctive guitar work and Satwan's traditional Indian percussion created a sound that felt both exotic and intimately familiar.
Canadian audiences had never heard anything quite like it.
The band quickly developed a reputation as one of the country's most innovative musical acts. Yet behind the scenes, tension was building like pressure beneath the Earth's surface. Former band member Bruce McGra would later recall that rehearsals were often brutal affairs. Terry Jacks, it turned out, was a perfectionist of the most uncompromising kind. He demanded absolute control over every aspect of the group's sound, every lyric, every instrumental choice. His vision was singular and unyielding. During live performances, arguments between Terry and Susan would occasionally become so heated that Susan would throw down her tambourine in frustration, tears streaming down her face, and walk off stage mid-performance. Yet somehow, the music never stopped.
They always returned. They always continued. In 1969, the Poppy Family released a song that would change everything. The track was called "Which Way You Going, Billy," and it wasn't born from some grand studio session or careful planning. The recording took place in a small Vancouver studio for only a few $100s. Terry had originally written it as "Which Way You Going, Buddy?" from a man's perspective, but Susan believed the song would resonate more powerfully if sung from a woman's viewpoint. Together, they reworked the lyrics, searching for the perfect replacement word. They settled on Billy, though the true inspiration for that name would become a subject of debate for decades to come. Susan insisted she had suggested the name of one of her brothers. Terry flatly rejected this version, claiming in later interviews that the inspiration came from an obscure folk song. Whatever the truth was, it remained locked between them. The band first shopped the recording to major American labels in Los Angeles, hoping for a breakthrough deal. Every single one rejected it. Undeterred, they returned home to Canada and released it through London Records anyway. By the summer of 1970, while traveling through Los Angeles for an interview, Susan and the band were sitting in the back of a chauffeur-driven car when the driver casually mentioned something that would alter the trajectory of their lives forever. The song had just sold 1 million copies. There was no official ceremony, no dramatic phone call, just a passing comment from someone behind the wheel. For a moment, Susan could hardly believe what she had heard. Then reality crashed down like a wave. Which Way You Going, Billy? Became the first record from Vancouver to sell over 1 million copies. In the United States, it climbed to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, held back from the top spot only by Ray Stevens' Everything Is Beautiful and the Beatles' The Long and Winding Road. The song's success was staggering. It sold over 2.5 million copies worldwide. At the Juno Awards, the Poppy family dominated the ceremony, winning every category they were nominated for. They had arrived on the international stage. They had achieved the dream that most musicians only fantasize about. But success, as it often does, came with a hidden price tag that nobody had anticipated. The paradox of the Poppy family's enormous success was that it ultimately led to the band's dissolution. After Billy became a worldwide phenomenon, Terry made a controversial decision. He dismissed both Satwant Singh and Craig McCow from the group, reducing the Poppy family to just himself and Susan. The sound that had made them revolutionary was deliberately stripped away. Even as a duo, they continued producing successful records. That's Where I Went Wrong and Where Evil Grows climbed the charts. They remained a steady presence on Canadian radio through 1972. Yet despite their continued commercial success, Terry was becoming increasingly unhappy with the demands of the music industry. He openly admitted that money had never been his primary motivation. He disliked touring intensely, avoided media attention whenever possible, and often joked that he would rather spend his time fishing than promoting records. The workload had become overwhelming. He was handling not only the songwriting and performing but also much of the management and business operations. By the early 1970s, their longtime manager, Dub All Britain, who had also managed rockabilly legend Brenda Lee, passed away in 1971. The loss created a significant void. Then came another pivotal decision that many believe fundamentally altered the trajectory of the Poppy family's future. Terry turned down an invitation to perform Which Way You Going, Billy, on The Ed Sullivan Show, one of the most prestigious television platforms in the world. Instead, he chose to appear at Expo 70 in Osaka, Japan. Unlike many successful groups of that era, the Poppy family never fully embraced touring. Susan genuinely enjoyed performing live, but Terry never felt comfortable living on the road. His relentless pursuit of perfection was also taking a devastating toll on his marriage. Years later, Terry would openly admit how demanding he had been during Susan's vocal recordings. He believed that emotional songs required genuine emotional performances, not technical perfection. During the recording of Which Way You Going, Billy, the first version sounded technically flawless, but Terry felt it lacked the heartbreak the lyrics demanded. That feeling bothered him so much that it sparked a heated argument when they returned home. The next day, they went back to the studio. Susan was emotionally drained, completely exhausted, and worn down to her core. This time, her performance captured exactly what Terry had been searching for: raw, vulnerable, real. He later admitted that he had intentionally pushed her because he believed genuine sadness could not be faked or manufactured. In his view, songs about heartbreak needed to sound genuinely broken. Yet Susan's naturally bright, joyful voice required constant softening for those recordings. The pressure mounted relentlessly. The marriage began to crumble under the weight of Terry's impossible standards. By 1973, the couple divorced, and both launched separate solo careers. Susan immediately released her debut solo album, I Thought of You Again. The title track became a major Canadian hit and earned her a Juno nomination. The album contained another personally meaningful song, You Don't Know What Love Is, which had emerged directly from a heated argument with Terry. During one fight, Susan had told him he simply didn't understand what love meant. Days later, Terry returned with a complete song built around those exact words, turning their argument into art and their pain into music. While Susan focused on her performing career, Terry expanded his business interests considerably. He owned Gone Fish Music and later Sunfish Publishing, building an empire behind the scenes. Yet producing records remained his greatest passion. Even while producing Susan's music despite their deteriorating relationship, he continued releasing material under his own name through Bell Records' American distribution network. His first notable solo success came in 1970 with I'm Going to Capture You, which reached number 16 in Canada. Nearly 2 years later, Concrete Sea matched that achievement. Then his cover of Buddy Holly's I'm Gonna Love You Too climbed to number 7, giving him another significant hit. Still, none of those songs prepared the world for what was coming next. In 1974, Terry released the title track from his debut solo album, Seasons in the Sun. That single didn't just become another hit on a long list of achievements. It completely transformed his career and his life in ways he could never have anticipated. The song would define everything that came after, overshadowing every other accomplishment, becoming the one thing the world would forever associate with his name. The story of Seasons in the Sun actually began long before Terry Jacks ever entered the picture. The song was originally written in 1961 by Belgian singer-songwriter Jacques Brel, titled Le Moribond, which translates to The Dying Man. It was performed entirely in French, a haunting meditation on mortality and human connection. A few years later, in 1964, American poet Rod McEwen translated the lyrics into English, and the Kingston Trio recorded the first English-language version. That was the recording Terry happened to hear, and it immediately captivated him in a way he couldn't quite explain. Years later, during an interview, Terry recalled having dinner with Jacques Brel in Brussels after his own version became a worldwide hit. During that conversation, Brel revealed the real inspiration behind the original composition. According to Terry, Brel explained that it was about an elderly man dying from a broken heart after discovering that his best friend was having an affair with his wife. Brel had written the song while staying in a brothel in Tangier, and his original performance was completely different from the gentle ballad most people know today. He performed it almost like a marching song, energetic and rhythmic, which created a jarring contrast with its deeply tragic lyrics. In Brel's version, the dying man says goodbye to his priest, his closest friend, and finally to his unfaithful wife, forgiving her even after discovering her repeated betrayals. The story haunted Terry. There was something about its emotional weight that stayed with him long after hearing it. Even though he never particularly cared for Rod McEwen's English translation, the song itself continued to occupy his thoughts. Eventually, Terry decided to create his own arrangement entirely. Rather than recording it himself immediately, he first offered it to one of the biggest bands in the world, the Beach Boys. The group had invited Terry to produce a recording for them, which he considered an extraordinary honor. Believing Seasons in the Sun would perfectly suit their signature harmonies, especially with Carl Wilson on lead vocals, Terry suggested they record his arrangement. The sessions began at Brian Wilson's home studio, but they quickly became far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. Although Terry had been brought in as the producer, Brian Wilson struggled to relinquish control of the creative process. Known for spending months obsessively perfecting recordings, Brian repeatedly wanted to continue working on the master tape. The situation became so difficult that the recording engineer reportedly took the master tape home every night just to prevent Brian from making further unauthorized changes. The Beach Boys sessions dragged on endlessly, consuming enormous amounts of Terry's energy and emotional resources. With everyone pulling in different directions, the recording never reached completion. Terry later admitted that the constant tension nearly pushed him to a breaking point. He eventually accepted that he simply couldn't finish the project under those circumstances. The band's personal lives only compounded the chaos.
According to Terry, the Beach Boys were going through an especially turbulent period.
Mike Love was deeply involved in spiritual movements.
Dennis Wilson had become entangled with Charles Manson before the murders occurred.
Brian Wilson was struggling with his own well-documented personal crises.
Meanwhile, Carl Wilson and Al Jardine were doing everything they could just to hold the band together. Under those circumstances, finishing a recording became almost impossible.
Yet the sessions weren't a complete loss.
While working with the Beach Boys, Terry collaborated closely with Al Jardine on backing vocals and developed an arrangement that he would later use when recording the song himself. Even then, Terry knew something fundamental had to change about the song's core narrative. Jacques Brel's original story centered on betrayal, infidelity, and forgiveness. The dying man spent his final moments saying goodbye to people who had hurt him deeply, including the wife who had repeatedly been unfaithful and the friend who had committed the ultimate betrayal. That storyline never felt right to Terry. Instead of preserving those themes of deception, he completely reshaped the song.
He rewrote much of the lyric and added an entirely new final verse.
His inspiration came from somewhere deeply personal, somewhere that hurt in a way that no commercial success ever could. One of Terry's closest friends had recently died from leukemia. That heartbreaking loss became the emotional foundation for his version of Seasons in the Sun.
Recording it was anything but easy.
Years later, during an interview, Terry admitted that he struggled with the very idea of performing the song. Because it was inspired by someone he genuinely loved, someone whose absence left a void in his life, he never felt comfortable earning money from such a deeply personal tribute.
That discomfort eventually became one of the reasons he would later stop performing live as often.
The rewritten version also reflected another painful real-life experience that had shaped his worldview. One afternoon, Terry was out playing golf with a close friend named Roger when Roger quietly revealed that he didn't have much longer to live.
At first, Terry refused to believe it. Surely there was some mistake, some misunderstanding. Sadly, the diagnosis was acute leukemia, and at that time, there was very little doctors could do. Just 4 months later, Roger passed away. That loss transformed Seasons in the Sun fundamentally. Instead of telling the story of a man betrayed by his wife, Terry focused on something far more universal and deeply human. The heartbreak of saying goodbye to the people who mattered most. His version became a farewell to a best friend, a father, and a loved one. He removed the themes of infidelity entirely and replaced them with grief, love, and acceptance. Even after finishing the recording, Terry still wasn't convinced he should be the one singing it. He doubted his own voice and offered the song to several established artists instead, including Larry Evoy of Edward Bear and Canadian singer-songwriter Gordon Lightfoot. Both declined the opportunity. With no one willing to record it, the finished master tape simply sat on the shelf, gathering dust, seemingly destined to remain unheard. Then came one of the most unexpected turning points of Terry's entire career.